Huge thanks to Marshwear Clothing. They are hooking up the 96 Wave listeners with a code for 20% off. A Charleston-based clothing brand for the pursuit of good times in the outdoors. From board shorts to rugged field wear, they have you covered. Listeners use code MARSH20 for 20% off an order. That's MARSH20. Check out all their new drops and collections at marshwearclothing.com. If you've had your eye on something, this is the perfect time. Thank you to Mex One, best tacos and margaritas in town. McKevlin Surf Shop, quality surf since 1965. And Thomas Brothers Productions for making this episode possible.
Marshwear. Clothing inspired by the need for versatility and style. For those wave chasing, flats pulling, field loving, campfire gatherers. For the doers, adventurers, and unconventional. For those who live by the highs and lows of the tides. For those in pursuit of good times.
Mex One Coastal Cantina. It seriously is my spot for incredible tacos and margaritas. So when they wanted to support the podcast, I couldn't have been happier. My go-to has always been the Bangin' Shrimp Bowl. It truly is the perfect surf-inspired beach bar. They're locally owned and always in support of the surf community. They always have surf videos on, so I feel right at home. Everything from tacos, quesadillas, Baja bowls, fresh salads, cold beer, and margaritas, everything is delicious. With 3 locations in Charleston, Mex One has you covered. Did you ever get into video besides what was on your housing?
Not typically, because most of the time I was there, I was working for Globe, so I was working with Joe G.
Yeah.
And they were doing everything, like for a long time. There wasn't even a red, it was only film.
Yeah.
So it was Super 16, and then finally he added red. Baron Hall would shoot red.
Oh, yeah.
But even in the water, it was Scott Sowens or Rick Jakovich, the Western Australian guy. And it was all Super 16.
Yeah.
Or Super 8. That's what he liked. So for the 12 years I was at Globe, they filmed, I shot photos.
I definitely have questions about that, just because the Globe, I mean,
It was fun. Those trips, it was imagine what we could do. We talk about it, and then somehow, we'd have these crazy pie-in-the-sky dreams of, we're going to get an elephant, or we're going to... And it would happen. We'd have millionaires walk up to us on the beach and be like, hey, you guys should come stay in our castle that's behind you. And we're like, yes, we should. The next thing you know, we're in Baja, Mexico, staying in this giant castle with, my room was bigger than my house, with my own in-ground jacuzzi in my bedroom. You're like, how'd this happen?
Just the Globe films definitely were a huge, when we were really starting, so it was just I wanted to edit everything just like they were doing and trying to learn.
The mind of Joe G. He's an awesome human. That's the best thing about those trips is I was with my close friends. I mean, the Hobgood still are close friends, and if I needed anything, I could call any of those guys. And a lot of when you step away from the surf world, it's kind of the closest thing I could describe it to is a lot of my friends in the military. When they transition out of the military, suddenly they're just it's like you just step through a curtain in time, and you just don't exist anymore. The surf world keeps on going on that train. You stepped off the train, and everybody that was on the train with you is like, bye, and you're standing there at the station going, I just traveled with those guys for 10 years.
Yeah.
And now I never hear from them, but it just is the nature of what it is.
We started this channel, we're from Charleston, South Carolina, and I would always hear your name, see your name, whether it was at the surf shop, and it was when we were really getting into film, and just anyone I could attach to that was already in the surf industry just is kind of who I would look up to, and so I really appreciate you doing this.
Oh, absolutely. I'm stoked you guys were willing to make the drive up, all the way up here to Wilmington, North Carolina.
Yeah. And so what is your connection with Charleston?
So Charleston's where I learned how to surf. I had a research fellowship at the Fort Johnson Marine Research Center my junior year in college. It was a competitive scholarship. I'm a bit of a nerd. It was what I applied all over the country, and I was really looking for marine mammal research because that's what I was interested in. I went to a tiny school in Northern California where I grew up. Nobody did research. Everybody, if they were a biology major or biochem, went pre-med. I was like the outlier. So I literally went through the biology teachers. One of the professors, he had a drawer of like unopened mail that was basically fellowship opportunities, and I needed to get paid because I had to pay for school. So I was like, I can't go pay to do a fellowship. I can't go volunteer. It's not my reality. So Fort Johnson, I was chosen, one of 10 kids, and it paid, which was awesome. And I was the last person there because everybody else was semester systems and I was quarters. So I showed up after everyone got there. Everybody got to choose. I was the last person, like last straw. Here, this is your research project. And it was the only marine mammal project available, and that was the one I got. So it was like, and my boss surfed, and he's still down there. He runs the NIST lab, Dr. John Kuklik, at Fort Johnson.
Oh, wow.
And he's an awesome, awesome human, awesome family, and he just kind of adopted me, and he surfed. So I was like, oh, board meetings. I guess I'll start surfing. I grew up in Northern California, and where I lived, there's more great whites. I mean, now the surf scene's evolving. Like Ocean Beach is now, like last week there was a giant swell out there. I was just talking to the Gudiauskas brothers went up there, and they were like, oh my gosh, it was unbelievable. But when I was growing up, it wasn't very surf friendly.
Yeah.
North of San Francisco. So surfing, I did everything else. We wakeboarded, water skied, mountain bike, backpack, you name it. We did it if it was outdoors. But surfing wasn't really very high on the radar until that summer fellowship. And then I was like, if I'd found out about this sooner, I probably wouldn't have graduated.
Yeah.
So it was just like, I loved it. And when I was doing my fellowship in Charleston, surfed as much as I could and then left. And then they hired me when I graduated from college. So it brought me back to Charleston. I moved back in 1997. I'm old. So right out of college, packed up my Subaru, drove to the East Coast with my sister. We road tripped it back, and then moved into the Marine Center at Grice. They let me stay because I left on good terms as a research fellow. So they let me stay with the graduate students in the dorm at Grice. And I took a board back with me that I bought from my roommate in college or something. I don't even know where it came from. And started surfing at Folly a lot.
Yeah.
As soon as I moved back.
What was that scene like when you?
Well, there were I'm not exactly sure what the sandbars are like right now, but there was distinct crews. You had the pier crew, which was more the longboard wave, unless it was a big south swell off the pier. So learning to surf, I surfed the pier a bunch because the washout was like, that was your Todd Youngbloods, your Sean Ducker, Harley Stevens, Bo Flemister, Anthony Osment. Those were the guys that like kind of ruled down there. And then kind of in between was 10th Street. And 10th Street had a good bar. A lot of the times when I would surf there just to kind of sneak out and getting closer to the washout as I was learning. And of course, Sullivan's Island back then had an amazing wave that I don't know if it's gone or not. I got an amazing barrel there one time, but every once in a while we go to Sullivan's Island. But for the most part, it was those three zones kind of at Folly. And for some reason, like Anthony was a kid. I mean, Anthony was so young then. He was like a little scarecrow, like a blonde-headed like scarecrow. And he like adopted me as like a little surf grom, and I was like, I guess I was 21. And him and Bo Flemister, like those kids, I surfed with them all the time. They'd stay at I ended up moving out of the Grice on James Island and move into Folly. So they'd come crash on the couch for hurricane swells and surf with me. And because I remember getting up, I'd be in the water before work in pitch black, like paddling out, like you could just see white water lines, just to get a couple extra waves before I had to go to work. So get out of the water, beat feet to Johnson Marine Lab at like 8:39, slide in, work all day, and then go straight back out and go surf till dark. So I was like a big Grom. Like I was a 21-year-old, 15-year-old, really.
Well, all those guys are still ripping at the washout.
I see Harley every once in a while up here. He was up here for a while. I'm not sure where he's at now. You know, the small circles of the world. I ended up traveling with Bo, and he kind of developed his writing career and ended up being an editor at Surfing Magazine, where I was for a long time. So it was crazy to do a trip with him, like after all this time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have nothing but fond memories of my time at Folly Beach and Charleston, for sure.
That's awesome. Was photography, was that any part of your childhood?
Yeah, in a sense. One of my family friends was a really phenomenal outdoor photographer, like just scenic stuff. And he kind of helped teach me about backpacking in the high Sierras. So I was exposed to it. And then my dad shot some photos, nothing serious. But when I was 16, I got a camera and started shooting our wakeboarding stuff. And I had my first photo published when I was 16 in Wakeboard Magazine. So that was like, oh. But my sister was the artist photographer. I was the science, like, super nerd. So I was like, whatever. You know, I'd taken art class. I didn't take any photography. Really no photography background until Charleston. Kind of, you know, I shot some wakeboarding, but that was just while we're in the boat. You know, if it's not your turn, take some pictures. And then right before I moved here, I got invited to go to mainland Mexico with Chad Speedy, who was like he was like the guru of, like, you had all these rippers and then you had Chad. And Chad was the guy that was like going to mainland Mexico on his own in the late 90s, before anybody knew about Pasquale's and all the jet skis were down there doing step-offs. He was going down there and paddling. So he invited me down there with Bennett. What's Bennett's last name? He's a captain now. Anyway. So it was like a few of us went down on this trip in the spring. Right before I moved here in the fall, it would have been the spring of 2000. And I took a camera with me just for, I don't know why. I remember when Chad first told me, he's like, okay, you're going to need to buy a gun. I'm like, I've got guns. He's like, no. He's like, not rifles, like a 7'2" or better surfboard. And I was like, what? He's like, yeah. So I drove up here to Wrightsville, and Surf City Surf Shop, they had like a 7.6 rusty gun. I wish I still had it. That somebody had, you know, done a Hawaii trip and left it in there, and I bought that. Went down, we flew into Guadalajara, hopped on a bus, took the bus to Pasquale's, and I got off at, you know, some of the guys were already there. We got off at night, and we're sitting at the dining room table, you know, at Edgar's place, which I don't know if it's still there or not. There was, you know, there's little family on the beach, and all of a sudden the silver started rattling like a train was coming. I was like, what's that? Is there a train through? And they're like, no, it's the surf. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be interesting. Because I just surfed the wash. I mean, I'd surfed some hurricane swells, but nothing like when I woke up the next morning, I was like, like, this is going to be a challenge. And it was a super fun trip. It was, I caught some good waves. I watched Chad get barreled on proper, you know, 8-foot, 10-foot waves, whereas, you know, I went out one day and I was just like, please God, let me get to the beach, you know, rode the, shoulder hopped it, safetied it, which is hard down to beach break because you got to be on the kind of peak to catch it. So got in, was like, oh my gosh, that's, you know, but then I shot photos when it was massive, like, because there were some days there that I was like, I wanted nothing to do with. So I just shot photos, and that ended up submitting those to ESM, Dick Meserol, Mez. He knew who Chad was through the grapevine, so they published a photo of Chad and like Huda Guy, back in the day. So Chad was Huda Guy, and that was my first published surf photo, and that was like the beginning of the dialogue back and forth with Mez on, you know, I took down high ISO film, and he was like, it's too grainy for print, you got to drop your ISO. And being an overachiever, I was like, well, fine, I'll show you, and started anything he'd give me, I'd like take it and then go one further and be like, okay, well, now what? So kind of a real fast learning curve starting there, and then, you know, shooting around Folly before I moved up here with with Sean and Bo. I think that there was, I haven't been to Folly in a couple of years, but in McKevlin's, there was one of the photos I took of Bo that was published. What was the name of that magazine? Carvin.
Oh, yeah.
My first kind of color photos were in Carvin magazine of Bo, and I think they still have those in McKevlin's, or they did. They had a they had a photo contest. I ended up winning it with a photo of Bo, and I think I got a Rip Curl Tide watch. Nice. That was like my first payment as a surf photographer. And I wasn't a surf photographer. I just thought it was fun, and then moved up here to Wilmington, to Wrightsville, to do my master's, not thinking I was going to shoot surf photos. And Chad Oakley, who was a photographer from here, had just moved down to Puerto Rico, and there was a real kind of big crop of up-and-coming surfers. So they just were like, "You're the photographer." And I was like, "Okay, fine." And then it really kind of blew. That's when the talent level here was high enough. Ben Bourgeois he had just qualified for the tour when I moved here, so he was gone. But Mark Hunt and the Gilligan brothers and Chris Curry, and there were a bunch of kids here. Jesse Hines was living here. So there was this pool of sponsored surfers that the media wanted to see photos of, and I kind of hit the ground running. Yeah.
Quick note, my first published photo was ESM, but the blah blahs.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't quite make it to Huda status. It was like
the photo was actually, like, you know what? Maybe it was in blah blahs. It could have been blah blahs, like Southeastern blah blahs. It was one of the. I know Chad got into Huda Guy, but I think you're right. I had forgotten about blah blahs. I think that's where they published it.
I didn't think about that name until you just said that.
I'm pretty sure Mez put it in blah blahs, and then with a little write up about the trip.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's funny. South Carolina kids went to Pasquale's.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's funny. Thanks for correcting me. My ego is now checked. It was not Huda Guy. It was blah blahs.
That was my goal, to be in Huda Guy, though.
Oh, that was huge.
I'm still hoping I get it.
And the crazy thing is, Mez shoots now more than ever. He's at every contest on the East Coast. I'm like, and I always called him Grandpa. Like, that was our running joke. And I'm just like, how does he keep going? And he has some health issues, but it keeps him fired up. I'm stoked to see. So many kids got their start because of Mez and Dugan in ESM. Matt Walker, came out of there as an editor. I ended up working for Matt Pruitt, which, it's just like the small weird world of people that kind of came out of ESM.
Yeah. So we started shooting surfing in Folly and made movies, and then it progressed to I was traveling with the younger pros, and being in Charleston, I always felt like I was just the odd man out. I was traveling from a different location every time, and like my plane ticket would be like more expensive or something like that. So did you feel that way being in Wrightsville? I know you had so were you mostly doing East Coast stuff, or did trips happen
So at first it was drive to Hatteras, drive to Hatteras, drive to Hatteras. But as soon as I got a water housing, and that it all happened really fast. My trajectory was kind of crazy. There was some divine intervention, because I should not have had the trajectory that I did. But I went from like doing my master's in biology. Everyone, when I say I did my master's, like, oh, photography and film, like, no, biology. Like, I didn't do anything with photography. And then started shooting ESM. That trip happened with ESM. That was 2000. So while I did my master's, I was shooting and running to Hatteras. In fact, my primary professor was like, you need to be in the lab a little bit more. I'm like, but I'm getting my work done. We need to see you around work a little more. Okay. Because I was chasing swells to Hatteras. Yeah. Then I got a housing from Chris Straley, sold me an SPL for an EOS 630. And literally the first day, we had a dredge point at Wrightsville. I was swimming with like snorkeling fins because I didn't know any better. That's all I had. So I was like, oh, grab some snorkeling fins. They got ripped off by the current. So I was just kicking around. And I ended up getting a rip curl ad of Matt Gilligan and a spread in ESM, like from the first swim. And I was like, this water photography is fun. I'm like, staying on the beach is stupid. I just get roasted, and then people just want to ask me if I can see whales or see Mars with my big lens. I'm like, this water stuff, they leave me alone and I get to yell at people. This is awesome. So I started traveling pretty early on. Like my first trip was for Trans World, not surfing. Pete Terrace was at Trans World. I was talking to all the editors. I was talking to Flame. Jason Murray was at Surfer, and Pete Terrace was at Transworld. And I was hitting him up constantly for information. I was sending in sheets of slides like every other day. I'd go down to Sweetwater. Tony Butler would look at the stuff and be like, "Yeah." And I'd be like, "I like that one. I'm sending it to the magazine." And back then, the magazines had mastheads, print magazines. There was a phone number for the magazine. I'd call that number and just be like, "Can I speak to your photo editor, please?" And so I got to know very fast. They didn't have a choice. I was going to be the East Coast photographer.
Yeah.
And at the time on the East Coast, it was Kevin Welsh with Surf NRG out of Florida. Chris Wilson was out of Florida, Mez and Dugan, obviously, and then Seth Stafford was out of Jersey. But there was nobody really here. Billy Diggs was shooting photos in the Outer Banks some. Matt Lusk wasn't shooting yet. Daniel Pullen wasn't shooting yet. There really was nobody. So when I started shooting, the mags got really interested really fast because there was all this talent between the Outer Banks and here, and nobody shooting it.
Yeah.
So Terrace gave me a break and said, if you can get, it was Benny, Alec Parker, Brian Toth, and Asher Nolan and Ben to go to Nicaragua, we'll do the trip, because nobody had done a trip to Nicaragua since right around the end of the Sandinista War. Matt, Archie. Archie went down there with somebody else. I can't remember who, but nobody had been down there. And I called back 45 minutes later to the magazine. I was like, "Oh, it's set up. I've got a surf camp. I've got the surfers okayed. Let's do this thing." And he was like, "Oh, I guess okay."
But I mean, world-class talent.
Yeah.
They're just from the East Coast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was the first trip. So, but yeah, I used to have to drive to Raleigh all the time to get flights. It sucked. I did, because all those flights left early in the morning for Central America, and they got back at midnight.
Yeah.
So I've done so many drives where you're literally windows down, air conditioning on, slapping yourself in the face, trying to get home, where I should have just spent the night, but I didn't. I was like, I had to get home. I had just gotten married. I mean, literally got married, first surf trip, boom, boom.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So my wife was like, "Oh, what? I didn't sign up for this. You're supposed to be a marine biologist, and now you're like, see ya, I'm going to Barbados. See ya, I'm going."
Yeah.
So, and back then we didn't have cell phones that could call and FaceTime. They didn't have Skype yet. So when I was gone, you just gone. You didn't know what was going on at home. And back then we didn't have Surfline really developed yet. So you didn't go for a swell. You went during swell season and hoped you got a window. And if you didn't, you might extend. First trip to Nicaragua was 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Even the Skeleton Bay trip, that trip turned into 3 weeks because we could, with swell, nobody knew what that place needed. So it was and this is later on, but we'd watch swells go by and they wouldn't show up. So we're like, okay, well, I guess we're going to stay. And everybody just kept extending. And guys had to leave and go to US Open, and they were super bummed, and we're like, we're staying.
Oh my gosh. That first trip with Lost Guys?
No, the first trip was, Evan Slater, the editor, who's,
oh, yeah.
he was editor-in-chief. It was him and me. We got to share a bed for 3 weeks in a hotel in Walvis Bay. And then it was Corey Lopez, Pete Mendia, Hank Gaskell, and Mitch, what's Mitch's last name? Colburn. Yeah, sorry. And Mitch.
Wow.
And then Corey had to go to US Open, so he left. Mitch was having a breakup with his girlfriend at the time, so he got super bummed out on life, and he left. So then it was just Hank. Oh, and then there was Google Earth Challenge winners. So we had these random guys, Brian, I don't even know Brian's last name, some random dude that won Finding the Wave, even though guys knew it was there. Some of the South Africans were already surfing it. But that was the first photo trip there. Anyway, I digress. But yeah, lots of crazy, weird travel and from the East Coast that just crushed you. You definitely, guys in California, they're like, "Oh, we're going to Hawaii." You're like, that for me is an ordeal.
Yeah.
For them, it's a 5-hour flight.
Yeah, I would never get on the Mexico trips because they were it didn't make sense to fly me.
Yeah.
To go. So I'm still trying to go to Mexico.
Yeah, those trips. I mean, fly through Mexico City, and then, or through, so many weird connections. And back in those days, the CT guys had travel agents that were like really good. And as I progressed in my career, I started using like waterways travel. Like those guys would like, because some of our travel is so complex to get to these weird places, and you didn't have the capability on the internet you did then. So unless you had a person that was logged into the system, you had no idea how to get, like, I don't know how to get there, but they did. So
yeah. I didn't know you were on that Skeleton Bay trip.
I actually came up with the name Skeleton Bay.
Really?
Really.
Is that?
It's just, I mean, it's one of those things that's lost in the anarchy of time. But yeah, we were sitting there and Evan was writing the story. And we were there and he's like, we can't call it what it is because we're trying to protect it.
Yeah.
This is before it's turned into what it is now. So we can't just call it what it is. And I was like, well, the whole coast is a skeleton coast. Let's just name it Skeleton Bay. And he's like, cool. So he wrote it as Skeleton Bay. That's what it is.
Wow. What about seeing now, like that last swell?
I think so many of my friends went, which is great. Like kids from here, like underground kids, like Rob Brown, and they're all over that wave, and they're surfing it really well. Like Joey Crum got the wave of the swell. Brett kind of had a shocker, but those kids
he's gone a lot now.
Yeah, he's gone a bunch of times, and now it's like a thing. Back then, everybody was like, "Oh my gosh, what did you?" Because we waited for 21 days. Day 21, our last day. The night before, we had a party on the beach, kind of like a bonfire, and just hung out. And there were these perfect little waves, like going down the point. We'd check it every day. We never left. Like for 20 days, we drove that beach to check that wave, and we surfed other waves that were picking up the swell, but it was just going by us. You could see it on the horizon. It was so frustrating. And finally, we're like, okay, tomorrow's our last day. We're going home. We've got to get back. And we woke up the next morning, got down there, and it was just like. And you're just like, and the guys surfed all day. I swam, ran the beach, everything else. By the end of the day, they're like, you want to catch a wave? I'm like, I can't even, my hands are cramped like this from holding the camera all day. I can't even, no, I can't do that. And then of course, Corey being, he heard about it after he'd been, he was like, what the heck? So he figured it out real fast. Next swell, he took Ian, Walsh, and Andy. And that's when they scored it. And the magazine flew Flint over, which pissed me off because I'm like, seriously? Yeah. I've just spent 21 days here and you're going to fly Jeff Flint with these guys? And he basically looked at my photos, was like, okay, this is what they want, and shot a cover. So I didn't get the cover of that.
Wow.
And I was just like,
Yeah, jeez.
But that's just the nature of it.
To stay there for 21 days, is that a part of your kind of personality that you're going to stick something like that out, or was that more of the time back then where because you were married?
I was married.
Yeah.
It was kind of both. I mean, I'm pretty stubborn, really stubborn, and I want to. If I'm gonna do something, I'm not gonna do it part way. So, you could ask any. I mean, my nickname was the Water Nazi. I would keep guys in the water. I'd put in Hawaii, I'd put those goo packs, those triathlon goos in my board shorts pocket, and if my surfers hadn't gotten what I wanted, I'd be like, they're like, we're hungry. I'm like, eat a goo pack. You haven't earned it. We're gonna get this shot. So I worked really hard, and that's, I think, it was a blessing and a curse. I mean, it was hard on my marriage because I would stick this stuff out. It was great for my career because the guys knew if they went with me, I was gonna bust my ass, from the time we got up to the time we went to sleep. Because I'd learned here, and I remember MJ Marsh from Marsh Surf Shop in Atlantic Beach. He was like the Quicksilver Kid, and he was down here, and he partied at Red Dogs all night. And I had told him, let's shoot in the morning. So I showed up at crack of dawn at C Street at Wrightsville, and it was crap waves, waist to stomach high, sloppy. He was passed out, probably feeling the effects of the night before at Red Dogs. In his car, I don't want to surf. I'm like, come on, dude. All we need is one. And I think it was more of it worked out well for MJ, but it set my bar very low for a condition threshold that I thought I could get work done because we got an ESM cover that morning. My first ESM cover, and the waves were that big. And I was like, oh, I can get photos done in anything. And that was great from the magazine's perspective because they'd send me on random, like I was the Brownwater Navy. I didn't go to the Perfect Waves in Indo, the boat trips. That was Jeff Flint and Pete Frieden. They'd send me to like Uruguay or random spots where they just were like, we don't know. And I'd come back and I'd have photos because I'd push the guys even when they didn't want to surf. I'm like, I know I can get, like, I've gotten covers in this before. Why can't we do it now? So it was, I worked really hard. People, everyone's like, oh, you have so much fun. You must have surfed a lot. Nope. I never traveled. Not once in my entire career at the magazine did I travel with boards.
Yeah.
I took spear guns. If it was flat, I'd spearfish, depending on the location. But I never took boards because I caught a few waves here and there on one of the guys' boards. But if I want to surf, that means the waves are good enough to shoot photos in.
Yeah.
And the guys aren't there for me to surf. Like I'm not,
Yeah.
I took it really seriously.
Yeah.
Because I was gone from my wife, and I thought I was like, okay, if I'm going to be gone, I've got to work hard. I've got to be in my head, I've got to be the best that I can be because I'm trying to provide a living out of this, which is a dumb idea to start with. Kids at home, don't be a surf photographer. It's really hard. I've told that to kids. They'll like, can we have coffee and talk about being a surf photographer? And I'll sit down with them and be like, are you sure this is like, it's fun, but don't expect to make a living at it, especially now. Now it's like ridiculously hard.
Yeah, I was going to ask you your thought and state of that with, it's like
the death of surf photography thanks to the internet. Yeah. I mean, no offense, Surfline. I love you guys. But a Surfline photo buyout is $40. I was like, and the magazine, like, so to put it in perspective.
It's $40 right now.
Right now, it's $40 for online usage. And that includes their social media. So kids, you're not going to get rich at $40 a shot. You can't even pay for gas. But do it if you love it. So at the height of my career, when I was overpaid by the magazine, I was making $2,500 a month, which you can't live on. Like, you can't have a house. You can't, like, thankfully I had Globe. Like, they were the reason I was able to continue doing it, because editorial rates, like, Chris Burkhart figured it out real fast. Like, he was smart. He figured out, I'm going to appeal to the masses. I'm going to shoot stuff that's like big environment, small on the athlete, and his formula has paid off. And he's, but I was like focused on being, I'm going to be the best surf photographer on the planet. That was stupid. As far as, I go back through, like, there were so many opportunities I had where I could have been photographing other things, but I was so focused on getting what the magazine asked me to get.
Yeah.
That in the long term, for the short term, for getting publication, I knew what they wanted, and I was able to provide that. So it was great from that perspective. But as a photographer for longevity, you go back and you look at stuff, and you're like, I don't have any photos I could even sell for stock because it's all related to what the mission of the trip was. But I would tell kids, do it if you love it. Don't do it thinking this is going to be what I'm going to do for 40 years. The guys that have done that, there's exceptions. There's guys that live where the waves are just amazing and they can get away with it because the world, Hawaii, everybody comes to Hawaii, so there's guys that can do it. But it's hard, and it's really hard now. I mean, the surf world is upside down. The industry sucks. Like, surfers are getting dropped left and right. It's just not what it used to be. I kind of hit it during the golden era, kind of. Yeah. There were some times where guys got, the Aaron Chang era was pretty, Aaron, Jeff Devine, those guys had it pretty sweet. And then I kind of came in at the end of that into the launch of the digital, and it stayed good until like 2008 when everything crashed. That was like, the surf world was cranking, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh my gosh, like guys were getting fired. My boss at Globe got fired. I took a pay cut, like 50% pay cut. He kept my job for me. Brian Robbins, he's awesome. He works for the WSL and for Future now, but he was the team manager at Globe, and he fell on the sword for me because he knew I had a family, and he's like, okay, well, you have to keep Struntz on. And they're like, okay, 50%. I remember that phone call. It was right at Christmas, and I was just like, oh my God. What? Like taking Christmas presents back, because we just come off this crazy Hawaii season. Like, it was pumping. We got so many good photos, did all these different shoots. We're like, we're killing it. And then we got back, and they're like, and we're slashing the surf program. We're like, dope, we're expendable. Wow. But I ended up staying with Globe until 2015. So he saved me and perpetuated the Joe G years.
Yeah. The Globe films, were you doing other stuff besides surf specific for Globe, like the lifestyle? And
we do lifestyle on location. Yeah, I mean, it was whatever was built around the film. So we do lifestyle shoots that were tied, like, I almost want to say skits, but they weren't, like, we'd set up crazy stuff in the desert with models and everything else and do shoots out in the desert, or wave pool stuff, just different things.
Yeah, so did Globe, before they slashed that, did they have a huge budget, or just their visions were always what made it seem like such a world that they built?
I don't think we ever had a huge budget, because, I mean, we did some of the big stuff, like Strange Rumblings. That was after the 2008 thing.
Yeah.
So it was it's the vision, creative genius of Joe G. I mean, there's nobody like Joe, and I'm stoked for him because he lives on the East Coast now. He's down back in South Florida, but he still works for Globe. He's still doing his thing.
Oh, wow.
And they go through cycles where they're going to be like, okay, we're going to put money back into surf. And then they're like, no, this is stupid. Why are we doing this? And like, so Joe's been on this roller coaster for years of like, I have assets, I don't have assets. But most of what we made happen was just on the fly, like with no budget. Like, you're on location and you're like I told, it'd be awesome to have an elephant. And we meet somebody that, oh, we have an elephant. Like, okay, can we use it? Sure. Or, hey, why don't you guys stay in our giant castle? Or, or, hey, the Sheikh's pilot loves surfing. He'll bring some of the Sheikh's supercars to your shoot. Like just random stuff that would happen.
Yeah.
So from Electric Blue Heaven or Strange Rumblings or Year Zero, like there was always some crazy idea that we were just like, it'd be so cool if this happened, and then it would, and you're like, how did that go down? Like, and everyone, freak out in the movie premiere, and you're like, yeah, we planned it that way.
Was it hard to get the surfers to be a part of those, like the extracurricular of like filming for a movie with the skits? Or
not the Globe stuff, really. I mean, getting Taj was always a challenge because he was busy doing other things, being Taj. But the rest of them got it, especially Dion. I mean, Dion was a driving force, at Globe. So he understood early on that, hey, I'm a good surfer, but I'm really good at this lifestyle thing as well. So, and Nate Tyler was there. The hobbies are pretty easy. They'll just whatever. Like, and Yaden, well, we had Fisher. Like now he's like a giant DJ. It trips me out because I'm like, holy crap! Like you go on social media and you look at Fish and you're like, you're out of. But he's always, that's been Fish ever since day one. Like him and Yaden were like two little like wild children back when I started at Globe. Like we did an Australia trip. We stayed at Nathan Webster Noodle's house, and those two were like tearing through Eastern Australia like wildfire. I mean, painting the town red, like those two had it down. And now Yaden has kids and they're surfing trestles, and it's awesome to see. And Fish is still Fish, and he will always be that guy. Like the loudest, most brash. Yeah.
Yeah. Did that wave pool trip that Dion did, and then now with wave pools, and it's almost like the same cycle of it's over in the Middle East.
Yeah, Dubai's or Abu Dhabi's getting another one with Kelly. It's crazy the tech that they've put into it. I mean, when Dion first found out about that Abu Dhabi pool, it was like super hush hush. Like we weren't telling anybody what we were doing. Like they brought me in at the last second. They're like, "Hey, you're going to Dubai." I was like, "Okay." then we got there, and the crazy thing is we had onshore winds, and it was wrecking the wave. and we couldn't figure out, like, the guys weren't able to do what they wanted to do. We were trying to figure out if we could get a jet ski in the pool to whip them at it. We're like, because we mobilized all this effort to get over there, and they couldn't get the maneuvers they needed. And then we figured out if we slowed the cycle down and took it off of, like, its automatic cycle of waves every however many, and dropped it down, the wave quality got better, and then the wind got good, and then the magic happened, and Dion had the session of his life. Like, he was surfing out of his mind. I mean, it probably helped to have 24 Russian supermodels hanging around the pool. He was fired up, but it was like he was pulling everything he was trying, like stuff he'd never tried before. He was stomping it. It was really impressive to watch him just like figure it out, because it was hard. It was not like you look now at Kelly's pool and it's this dreamy thing. Like, when we first got that wave, we were like, oh crap, this might not work, but it came together.
Yeah, I watched that video a lot, but it wasn't because of the models. It really wasn't. I just, everything that they created with those films just was another world. Yeah,
it was always trying to transport you, like, whether it was year zero to post-apocalypse to Shangri-La with the next one. I mean, it was...
Yeah. Were you part of Secret Machine, too?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it was always something...
Yeah, Joe always had a crazy, wild idea where we were like, okay, let's try this. And he'd make it work. And he, it was all film, which was nuts. And, like, he was keeping the film houses in business, because everybody was going to red cameras, and they were just like, keep going, Joe, like, have film.
Yeah.
We didn't have a red camera on set for... probably until the end of Strange Rumblings. Then Barron was shooting like backup.
Yeah.
Because he'd shoot 2 angles.
But were you digital at that point?
I was digital at that point on the front end. I switched. When did I switch? Aaron Chang got that cover, and that was kind of like this is possible at Pipeline. And then I loved film. Like, I was like, this digital stuff looks like crap. So I kept shooting film. And the other thing is we had to buy all our own equipment. It wasn't like the magazine was going to buy you a Digicam, and you look at the resolution of those first Digis and the price, and you're just like, I can't afford that. Like, they're not making it worth my while. And then the prices came down, and then it was kind of like, well, you kind of have to. You have all this money invested in those 1 VHSs, like, you have all these film cameras that suddenly are just dinosaurs, and you're like, I can't even sell them.
Yeah.
And you're like, I hope this camera drowns, You're like... I need to get run over by a server.
Yeah.
So I can get an insurance claim, but no, you end up just kind of biting the bullet. So yeah, switching to digital was, the surfers, it was kind of like the first Instagram, like, in a sense, because before you'd shoot 100 rolls of film, the surfers would never see it. You'd go home, get it developed, freak out, send it to the magazine, and the first time the surfers would see it was when it came out in print.
Wow.
But then when you had digital, it was like, every night they expected a slideshow. Mm-hmm. Like, sit down, show us what you got. So it was a lot of pressure on you, because before you get to actually enjoy yourself on a trip, like, at nighttime you're like, okay, I can relax, eat some dinner, chill out. Then it was like edit. All the surfers pile in. If you blew a shot, there was no hiding from it.
That was my least favorite part. If you missed one shot, you had to, everyone's about to find out.
Yeah, there's no way around it. I don't know. You sure? I don't think you landed that. Didn't see it happen. No.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a big transition.
Yeah. A few questions from Cam Richards. He wanted to know the best waves you've ever seen on the East Coast.
Best waves on the East Coast. I would say, well, I've had a few pretty amazing sessions. So the first paddle session at Pump House down in Florida was pretty special, with Shay and Corey and Lopez and Pete Mendia, because that's before they started towing it. Like, we literally showed up at Reef Road, saw it across the jetty, and they paddled from Reef Road across the inlet to go surf it. And I shot from the end of the jetty with my 600 across the whole inlet. That was pretty amazing just to see that happen. Seen some amazing hurricane swells in Hatteras. One of the better days was one of our inlets that I've ever seen here. It was like 6-foot perfect left barrels that like, you don't expect that around here. That was special, but it went away real fast. But I'd say for the swell, I actually posted a photo yesterday of Jersey. I was up there for a Valentine's swell, I don't forget what year, and it was cranking. Like, I've like called the guys in the Outer Banks. I was like, these waves like fly over and poop on you guys on their way to Jersey because it's that good up here. I'm like, this is ridiculous how square it was. And it sucked because the water was 31 degrees, 33 degrees. It was really, really cold. And I wore a free dive wetsuit to swim because it was the thickest thing I had. But I should have had a weight belt because I was super buoyant and I was corking. And that's when he hit my ankle with his board and I had to go to the hospital and get stitches. But what sucked is it was so cold, the housing cracked, like one of the rubber things on the controls cracked.
Oh, wow. And
the housing failed. So I swam like in some giant, and it was like perfect. Like it wasn't brown Jersey, it was like blue water, wintertime,
wow,
like beautiful afternoon light, and not one of the water shots turned out. And I would like squeeze the trigger and nothing would happen. I was so mad. And then I got run over and had to go to the hospital and get stitches.
Oh my gosh.
It was awesome. But Sam still, for some reason, speaks to me because that was one of the biggest failures that I had as a surf photographer is when that housing failed. You were just like, oh my gosh. I'm like in giant barrels with Sam and Frank Walsh and it's not firing.
Oh my gosh.
That was frustrating.
Wow. Thomas Brothers Productions. If you've been enjoying the podcast or the videos we've been making through it, it's an extension of our video production company that we've been creating for the past 15 years. So if you have a brand, company, or a product, we make high-end commercials, storytelling documentaries, and compelling product videos that help your brand grow or get your story out there. McKevlin's Surf Shop. Quality surf since 1965. Come by the shop to see a piece of East Coast surf history, as well as a vast array of new brands, new designs, and new and used surfboards. McKevlin's has been a longtime supporter of us, our films, and now with the podcast. Visit McKevlins.com or visit them at 8th Center Street, Folly Beach, where wax is always $1. Did shooting in heavy water, did that just happen over time? Is that something that you, like the adrenaline?
I'm not going to say I was like the best. I was very well rounded. I could shoot in anything. But I always remember every winter the nerves of going like, all these guys are over there swimming because they live there. You had Scott Eichner, he was a bulldog, and Zach Noyle was coming up. You had all these, Jeff Flint. He spent weeks over there. And I would show up for about 2 weeks because Jonah's birthday is December 13th. So I'd try to be home for that. Or I was always trying to figure out my window. Like I'd go over right around Thanksgiving, come back around the 13th, or sometimes I'd stay longer. But you get off the plane, you show up, and it's like, you got to go. And you got to swim out in that lineup. And I'll never forget, there was one morning, and Surfing Magazine had a house right there. It's now, I think Target bought it. I don't know who owns it, if Target still owns it or not. But back when Kolohe and Carissa were on Target, they bought the house. Red Bull was right next door. Rip Curl was right next door to them. So Andy would be staying right next door to us with his entourage. And then our house, and then Oakley. It was a duplex. It was split. So Surfing Mag and Oakley, and then Rip Curl was right there, and then Billabong. And then it moved around, but we were always right there. And Damo called me and he was like, hey, Off the Wall's going off. And I was, at that point I wasn't staying. I was staying, Mag House had moved. I think was I staying at Log Cabins? I may have been staying at Logs. Came around and showed up on the beach. I was wearing a Globe wetsuit with giant Globe, because I had, part of the Globe team, I had big logoed wetsuits. I had big spring suit with like a big Globe logo on my hip. And I'm like, well, when I called him, I was like, or he talked to me, I'm like, well, how big is it? He's like, oh, it's like 6 foot. Bring your fisheye. I'm like, cool. Show up with my fisheye, and I walk down on the beach, and I'm sitting there putting my fins on, and there's nobody out. And I'm like, where's all the photographers? And guys are hooting on the beach, yeah, Struntz. And I'm like, and then I see a set come, and I'm just like, Damo, you bastard. It was huge. It was like 8 foot plus. It was really good, but it was like apexing on off the wall, and Dan was like, "Come on, we'll go out through pipe." I'm like, "Oh, okay, I gotta go now," because the whole beach is screaming and whistling. The Volcom house is hollering. I'm like, I don't have a choice. Go Struntz. You're like, I'm going. Swam out through pipe, swam over, and it was intense. Like, there was not another photographer out there, so you didn't have people to line up on. It was just kind of like Big Peak coming through, and I looked around. And it was Mick Fanning, Kieran Perot, Mark Matthews, Damo. I think that was it in the lineup. And you're just like, what am I doing out here? I'm like, Mark Matthews is like hell slab guy. I mean, Mick's just a different level. Kieran Perot was like a gnarly slab guy.
Yeah.
Damo's a gnarly slab guy. And I'm kicking around out here. I ended up getting some really cool photos. Like, I got one of Mark like looking out of the mouth of the barrel. He's bottom turning the base of this giant barrel, and that I never thought, I'd have a photo like that in the magazine, because I just didn't get that much exposure to it. But I was really happy when I got to the beach.
Yeah.
I was just like, thank you, Lord. We survived that one, because that was a lot of water moving.
Yeah, jeez. What, who were some of your favorite people to shoot with? Was there someone that you really kind of continued with your career with?
Well, the Globe team was just like, Dion and Nate and the Hobbies were like family. I mean, we traveled together on so many trips. I got to travel with almost everybody. So, some guys were easier than others. Some guys were harder than others. But I knew the Hobbies would always, if the waves were good, you weren't taking a break. Like, they're going to froth out. They turn it into two little monsters when there's good waves. Like, it's like, you're like, dude, simmer down. What? We gotta go. Like these two little like wind-up toys and just froth out. And you're like, oh my gosh. And then, Bobby was always, he was always with CJ, so they were close. So I got to be, good friends with Bobby, and, you just kind of learn the different personalities. You got to kind of be able to get along with everybody. I only left one trip. One trip I got mad. I won't say who, but we didn't see eye to eye, and I was like, I called the editor-in-chief. I was like, this is BS. I'm out of here.
Oh, wow.
And he was like, okay. Got a flight and left.
Wow.
Dude was like, you're leaving? I'm like, yep, later.
Wow. Yeah. Do you think your career would have continued any with surfing if social media would have been as prevalent as it is now?
Social had taken off when I was still at the magazine, but it was weird because brands were buying images that would have been like Hurley, and I was doing stuff for Hurley, and you do a trip and it would all just go on social, and you're like, this is so weird.
Yeah.
All these big, beautiful images that would have been covers are now disposable content. Because I kept shooting, even when I started over at North American Rescue, I was still working for Globe, I was still working at surfing, and I was consulting over there, and then I started inching more and more that direction, because I was like, I need an off ramp, and that seemed like the best off ramp I could find. And I've been there almost 10 years, or 10 years, yeah. So, but it was social media. It just took away some of that specialness to the imagery, because now it's like this. It's disposable content. Mm-hmm. It's like you see the quality of content that surfers are putting out. That's just poof, gone, like scrolling through their feed.
Yeah.
Whereas before, everybody waited for that issue of the magazine or the next surf film to drop, because you didn't know what was happening. You didn't know what they were doing. So when Dane Reynolds stuck a huge air, it was secret until the video came out.
Yeah.
Like Modern Collective, or any of those films would pop out and everyone's just like, oh my gosh, like movie premieres. Now everyone's seen it.
Yeah.
Because somebody's poached it. Like, we used to hate poachers. Like, that was, you went out of your way. If I saw somebody shooting, hey, please don't distribute that anywhere,
Yeah.
we don't want to see it. Like, I'd have to go talk to people, because they'd show up and be like, oh, there's pro surf. You'd watch, and you're just like, no. Try to hide from paparazzi just because you wanted to have something that was unique. And then once the internet kind of gobbled everything up, and it changed the paradigm. Now surfers are their own brands. Like, they have their own media house. Like Brett, he does all his own video editing. He's putting stuff out. He has a film. Jeff works with him, Jeffrey, and they're putting stuff out constantly. They don't care if Surfline does a feature or not. They're like, we have a YouTube channel with more followers, so who cares?
Yeah.
We're going to do it on our terms. So it's changed. I mean, there's still some guys doing it, but it's definitely different than it was.
Yeah. So all through that time, though, you had one kid and then maybe your second child by now?
So Lorelai, there's a 7-year gap. So Jonah, had Jonah, and then 7 years later, we had Lolo. And once she came on the scene, it became very apparent when she was just starting to walk, like she was just like a year old, that it was not sustainable, because the mag was higher and higher demands. Well, you're a number one photographer, you got to go. And I had like 3 trips that were just back to back, like come home, repack, leave again. And I was just like, my wife was over it. I mean, our marriage had been through a bunch already just because I was gone all the time. So it was like, okay, like what am I going to do? And that's when I called North American and was just like, hey, you guys going to give me a job? And they're like, what are you going to do? I'm like, I'm going to start your social media and I'm going to shoot badass action photos of military operators the same way that I do surf. I'll do that for you guys. And they talked about it and said, like, literally, I got a phone call a little bit later and they're like, okay, come up, we'll sign a contract, we'll see what we'll do.
Wow.
And that was the beginning of a big transition.
Yeah.
I mean,
was part of it obviously spending time with your family and kids, but also to like make more of a living for?
Yeah, I mean, that was a big thing. To provide for the family was a huge, I didn't see the writing on the wall. I thought the surf magazines were so niche that the core market would sustain it. I didn't expect to see them fold. Like, I was shocked when, surfing's done. I was like, wow, thank you God for giving me an out before that happened. And then Surfer folded, and then you're like, Transworld went first, but you're like, kind of saw that one coming, but you're like, oh my gosh, like what's happening to the surf world? And it was just too, it was like, I was perpetuating surfers' childhood in a sense. These guys, some of them, it was a delayed onset of maturity for a lot of these kids because they're given so much from their sponsors at such an early age, and then they just live that life until all of a sudden they don't. But as a photographer, it was fun, and I enjoyed what I did, and I enjoyed the experiences and the people and all the rest, but there wasn't that sense of fulfillment as far as like, I'm making a difference in the world. There was like, I'm helping kids party. I'm paying for their worldwide party because that's what you're making kids look like they're superstars, and they were. I mean, they're phenomenally talented at riding waves, which in the big scheme of life, like, does not cure cancer. It doesn't do anything. It just is. It's the selfish. We're glorifying the most selfish act in the world, which is riding a wave. Like, I am getting this wave. Nobody else can have it. I'm gonna express myself on it, make me look good, so I can do it some more. I mean, that's surf photography.
Yeah.
So then when I switched over with North American, and suddenly I'm focusing on medics from military to first responders that are saving people's lives, and I'm helping perpetuate that, I was like, oh, I can get into this. Like,
yeah.
Because the people are pretty similar as far as like they're adrenaline junkies, like they let me kind of into the community, partly just because I'd been to a lot of the places they'd been without guns. And they, we're kind of like, okay, if you're not pretentious, you don't try to be someone you're not, they'll accept you. Like, their BS radar is real sensitive. They're like, no, you're fake. But if you're a normal human and nice to them and just, you don't know what you don't know and you don't try to hide it, then you're teachable. So I tried to be that person, and they kind of opened the door for me. And I've been at North American and haven't really looked back. I mean, I shot surf photos for the first time in a decade, like, other than shooting for Surfers Healing a couple weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, a month, whatever. And it was fun to do it. I was like, I can still do this, like, no problem. Like, but do I miss it? No. I get to surf with my kid on a daily basis. I'm helping educate people on how to save someone's life.
Could you tell people what North American Rescue, their mission is?
Sure, yeah. So North American Rescue is a company based out of South Carolina, in Greer.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So South Carolina company that was founded by a PJ, or pararescue airman, that was at the Tier 1, the 2-4 unit. And he saw a need for, at first it was collapsible litters, because they were using like Korea War vintage litters. So he came up with a litter that collapsed down and you could spray the blood off of. And he made them in his garage with his wife and started selling them out of the back of his car. And now he's really wealthy. So Bob went on to great things, started North American Rescue. I came on the scene. He'd already sold it once or twice, to capital investment groups and different things. So he was still involved and doing very well. But we provide point of injury care, like trauma, like imagine first aid, but for like, there's first aid components to some of the kits, but like really bad first aid situations. So what you see on the battlefield, what you see in shootings, what you see in car accidents, trauma.
Yeah.
So we provide products for treating that, and it's an awesome organization. I'm really proud that I've been able to help contribute to the mission of saving lives for the last 10 years now. And I get to do it through the social media, which is the devil. My boss, like the VP that's over my sector, loves to tell me that all the time. I hate social media. I'm like, I do too. I'd love to throw my phone in the ocean, but you pay me because I'm good at it.
It's a huge following.
Yeah, and I've grown it from zero.
Wow.
I leveraged, when I started it was nothing, and I leveraged my personal account because I had at that point people followed me because I was a surf photographer. So I leveraged it to start it. And back then there wasn't an algorithm, so whatever you posted, everybody saw.
Yeah.
And it took off because nobody had, I leveraged my photography. I'd be like, to some of the bigger military accounts, I'll be like, hey, I'll give you exclusive photos from a photo shoot we just did if you guys will push followers our way. So I was able to grow it. Instagram hates us. They love to throw us in Instagram jail.
Yeah. I
lost our account for the first quarter of this year. They deleted the account.
Wow.
I had to fight for it to get it back. They constantly tell me I'm violating community guidelines for violence. I'm like, we are promoting saving someone's life. They can't get it. Like, their AI doesn't get it. Their people that do it don't get it. I'm like, do you guys not see what we're doing here? This is like, yes, it's bloody, but we're teaching you how to stop that bleeding. Like, that's what the point of the post is. It's not to be like glorifying. There's no violence.
Yeah. One thing from following you these years of you showing people like bad things can happen to anybody in a normal situation.
Yep.
And so it's been eye-opening.
Yeah, some of my friends are terrified of, like, if I'm around, they're like, we don't want you, like, don't even talk about it. We just like to pretend it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But then it happens to somebody, and I mean, it can literally happen in someone's kitchen. Like, I could slice myself cutting up one of these deer. I could have a broadhead go through my leg. Like, there's so many things that just, humans are fragile. We like to we're a bit of an ostrich. We like to put our head in the sand and think it's not going to happen to us. But if you've been around enough folks long enough, we're not indestructible. We're pretty fragile. So it's super useful stuff. And it's not, I mean, now with the whole public access Stop the Bleed programs, school kids are learning how to do it. It's gross. I hope my kids never have to ever put a tourniquet on somebody. But if they did, if I needed it, they could help me. I'd rather have them be able to help somebody than watch them be like,
yeah,
oh, you're bleeding out. That sucks.
What is the best avenue for just the average person to learn?
Best avenue, check with your local community college or your local fire department, and see if they do a Stop the Bleed class. That would be a great starting point. You don't have to be in EMS or, to get the training. It's a national thing now. So especially in the month of May, that's like Stop the Bleed Awareness Month. There'll be classes all over the country that people can sign up for free, or you can pay to do more complex things. But a Stop the Bleed class, I think it should be like mandatory in high school.
Yeah.
Because it's such a great skill and it gives you confidence. Like, I want to be able to know that if I'm on a trip with my family and there's a car accident, I can help them or help somebody else. Because there's nothing worse than feeling helpless. It takes you from being a victim to being a responder, and that's a huge, just for your mental well-being, being able to say, hey, I did everything I could.
Yeah. What a wild thing to try to ignore.
Yeah.
That if something bad happened,
you'd have to live with that forever. That I could have done something, but I didn't know how. And that would haunt me. Like, for me now, it's like, they always, like, my family joke, because I'll be the first person to call 911 if I see something, like, and it's crazy. Like, you'll drive past an accident, you'll call 911 thinking that someone else, like, all these cars are driving, nobody's called it. Or, like, we drove by a fire one time that was next door to a fire department. I called and I'm like, hey, you guys are probably already aware there's a fire in your front yard. And they're like, nobody's called it in. And you're like, was it the Bank of America? I was like, how does nobody call it in? People just look at it or they film it.
Think someone else is going to do it.
Yeah, somebody else is going to do it. Somebody else will handle it. So that's something I really try to promote on our social channels is don't, be your own self-rescue and be able to help somebody else.
Wow.
So that's fun. Gross, but fun. My phone's disgusting. Like, my kids look at my phone. Is that real? Is that real? Jonah's been exposed to so much.
Yeah.
He'll probably go to therapy. He's like, my dad made me be a role player in a mass shooting. He's had, he literally has happened. He's been with SWAT teams pretending that he's been shot and with moulage all over him ever since he was little.
Wow. That's another thing that's been fun to watch that journey. I'm a parent I have a girl and a boy. They're super young, but seeing you take your son on
screw up parenting,
take on adventures and hunting, and that's a huge part of your life.
It's
bow hunting kind of or just
bow hunting, spearfishing, surfing. I mean, yeah, right now it's bow hunting because it's that time of the year. I'm really the stubborn part of me. I won't pick up a rifle. I keep bow hunting. Jonah will pick up a rifle before me typically because he's just like, okay, I've done that. But those adventures are really fun. Lolo's like a girl compared to a boy is like, oh my gosh. If I look at her wrong, it's going to be tears and she's not going to speak to me. Whereas with Jonah, it's just different with a boy. So I'm navigating that with a 9-year-old little girl who's very expressive, who has a mouth like her tongue is like a whip. I mean, she is a spicy meatball and she will dish it. So, but you dish it back and then it's tears. So it's like this, which is constantly getting her brother in trouble because he'll be like, what?
Yeah.
You're like, no, dude, you can't say that to her.
Yeah.
So it's fun. Parenting is the hardest, most rewarding thing ever. And as your kids get older, you'll like getting to take your kids on adventures. My wife says, oh, you just live vicariously through him. I'm like, no, I just want him to have a robust skill set and life skills that I think are important. And little, like, boys don't need to be, like, he plays stupid computer games with his friends. And, like, he didn't have that forever. He still doesn't have social media. And he's, like, begging for it. I'm like, nope.
Oh, wow.
But sitting in a tree teaches a kid to be still and be patient. And little boys need that because they're kinetic monsters. So I remember when he was little, I'd get so mad and frustrated because he'd be twitching in the deer stand and I'd be like, I was looking back, I was way stricter than I needed to be because I was like on a mission. With Lolo, she'll hunt with us some, and I just have to be super chill because I can't be like that with her. And Jonah's like, man, it must be nice, Lolo. Like, Dad's letting you take your iPad into the deer stand?
Yeah.
He never got that. He just got the, don't you move. So you learn, but it's a lot of fun. And it's awesome to share that, especially now as he's getting older. Like, hopefully, I told him the other day we were coming back. When did we hunt? And last night. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Driving home.
Yeah.
I was just like, man, I hope as you grow up and you go on to do your own thing that we can still do this. Because you're like, he's going to be 16. He's going to be driving. I mean, he's driving my truck right now with me in it, but then it's going to be like later I'm going to go do stuff with my friends. And you're like, he's been my sidekick. Like, we go everywhere together. So it's going to be, Dad's going to be like, oh, what am I going to do?
Yeah. Do you hope they can see as much of the world that you did, or is that a crazy thought to think for your children?
No, I hope they have the opportunity to travel. I wish, unfortunately, because of the nature of the travel that I did, it was hard to take. Even my wife, I couldn't take her. We just didn't. they didn't pay you enough to go. And then, you know, everyone thinks these trips were exotic. They were in exotic locations, but you were sleeping on the floor or on, you know, you're the photographer. You don't count. The talent counted, but you're just direct support. So there was never like, oh, I could take my wife and we could have a nice bungalow. And that wasn't going to happen. Like, everything was on a shoestring. Like, the mags, like, do it as cheap as you can. So I hope that they get to see the world. I hope the world is, I mean, it's such a crazy place right now. You're just like, oh my gosh, like, I look at some of the places that I've been and I could never go back to, and you're just like, that's nuts. Like, it's sad to see the deterioration of some of the areas and the instability and the suffering that people go through. And, you know, I've gotten to spend time there when it was at its best, and now it's at its worst. You're like, oh, I hate that. You hate to see that.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answers that one, but yeah. You want your kids to have a better life than you did. They're going to have to work pretty hard because I had a pretty good
Yeah.
Which, you know, isn't fair to my wife. You know, she's like, wow, it must be nice. Everything you do is somehow work. And that's what, you know, still, it's like my hunting ties into what I do with North American. The diving ties in. Like, everything I do somehow ties in, which is hard for a spouse that's looking at it going, that just looks like you're having fun. But work understands, you know, because they're getting content from it. They're getting a network of connections that you build through it. And my boss is awesome. My lefts and rights are pretty huge. But it pays off because I have stuff. I know people, and I'm a weird spider web across all these different action sports and different things because of the hobbies that I continue to do.
Yeah.
She calls me Peter Pan because I refuse to grow up. I'm like, okay, well, I'm doing my best not to grow up, but it's hard. I mean, being a parent's hard, being a grown-up's hard.
Yeah. How much has fitness and health been vital to?
Huge.
Yeah.
Huge. I mean, to be able to show up and swim at a break in any kind of conditions and swim for a long time. I think the longest I ever swam, one day at Pipe, I swam for 10 hours without getting out of the water. That's when you really hated digital, because before digital, 36 shots, back to the beach, drink some water, eat a banana, watch for a minute. Now it's like, I remember when we had, you know, 32 gig card and you swim out at Pipe and it's good and you're just like, and then you're stubborn. You're like, I'm not coming in. I can do this all day. I've been swimming, you know, I used to go to the Y and swim miles, you know, between trips. So peak condition, I could, swim for 10 hours at Pipe and proper second reef, first reef Pipe and be like, good to go. But even now, fitness plays a role because, you know, we go on an elk hunt. We did this fall in 7 days, we did 52 miles and like 20,000 vertical feet of like cross country, like gnarly, like no trails, like up and down, up and down, up and down. Now Jonah is like, he has 35-inch inseam, his legs, he just eats mountains, like, and he's just looking back at you like, what's wrong, Dad? Why are you back there? You're like, I hate you. So yeah, being able to, it's cheap life insurance is how I always looked at it.
Yeah.
And you've got to be able to keep up. Like even now with North American, like I show up to the PJ rodeo and you have all these young studs doing the obstacle courses or shooting challenges, and they're doing it in kit, and you've got to be able to move so that you don't get in their way, and they don't respect you if you show up fat. Like they're not gonna, like, can I say the word fat? Will I be canceled? Fitness, you know, those guys, they're PT studs. Some of the units that I shoot photos with, I mean, those guys are like legitimate world-class athletes. Like they do compete. Like they don't tell anybody where they work, but then they show up and run ultra marathons or do all this crazy stuff. And if you show up and you're a slob and you don't care about yourself, you can't keep up. And then just like the surfers, they're gonna be like, you're a liability. Don't be a liability.
One of the questions I had, is there a photo that's never been seen that
mattered more than any other? The funny thing is, I would say it wouldn't be from surf. It'd be something that I've shot for some of the military units. Because I have a lot of stuff I do, like the majority of that stuff never goes to the light of day. But it's helped, like, so a whole photo, like they brought me in, I got a weird message from a fake social media account. I was like, what the heck is this? They're like, can you shoot some photos of some guys in the woods doing medical stuff in North Carolina? I was like, not today, ISIS. It's like, what is this? So I called one of my friends who's an instructor at the Special Warfare Medical Schoolhouse, and I was like, hey, dude, do you know anything about this? He's like, actually, I'm instructing there. I was like, huh, okay, then I'll go do it. So I messaged back. I was like, I don't know who you are, but sure, tell me where and when. Well, the military photographer that was supposed to cover it didn't show up. And I'm the civilian that's not even supposed to be there. Photographed the whole thing and ended up briefing all the way to the commanding general of the Special Operations Command. The photos were like, because I brought action sports photography instead of a kid with a camera. Like I treated it like I would any shoot. And that stuff ended up getting funding for the medical training that is still going on in like guys' lives were saved downrange from that. So I would say the photo that matters the most to me is the photo that was never seen but helped those guys do their job.
Wow.
Over a surf photo.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's surf photos. I was looking through stuff the other. I got photos of everybody that never saw the light of day, but it's just riding a wave. Like,
yeah.
Guys do it better. Some guys do it worse. Some guys do it with more style. How many error verses do you need to see? I've seen a lot.
That's really cool. I mean, that also brings me to like thinking that you can find a career and a passion later
in life, in your golden years.
Well, we're still trying to find. I don't want to think that I'm gonna film the same type of commercial that I'm doing right now, but it's ever evolving.
Yeah, I mean, it's just being open, like having your skill set, always working to diversify your skill set. I think I don't know, if you're not learning, then do something different, is what somebody told me one time, and I think that's true. It's like, and it's hard because you get stuck in a comfort level. My wife would claim, now I'm pretty comfortable where I'm at because I know exactly what I'm going to, every day is a new adventure because none of it's planned. I mean, that's the crazy thing. Like, at most brands, their social media is like scheduled out. Like, we have this campaign launching and it's tied into this social campaign, and then we're going to do this with this influencer. North American Rescue is the mind of DJ. When I wake up in the morning, the day will unfold and our social media will unfold accordingly. I do not know what's going up there unless we have a sale. Like, there's specific things that I know are coming, but that's like 1% of what the feed is. It literally is, okay, Lord, let's go pin the tail on the donkey. I don't know what's coming. So the feed has a different feel. It's pretty organic feel, which is, I think, why it's been successful, because I run it like it's a personal page, and they let me do it.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, as far as like finding purpose in what you're doing, I think that's always, it's a moving target. And sometimes doors open and sometimes doors close, and faith plays a big role in my life. So that's kind of, I'm always kind of like, okay, is this where you want me to be? Or is it going to be something really uncomfortable where I'm going to have to figure out something different? And that was huge. Like, leaving the surf world was like almost traumatic because it becomes your identity. You're like, especially, so many years of doing it, you're like, this is what I do. This is, you show up anywhere. Oh, you're a surf photographer? Oh, can I just carry your bags? Like, I've heard it so many times. But it kind of, even though you're like, okay, my identity is as a Christian, husband, but it's really easy to fall victim to that. My identity is what you do, especially if it's something kind of sexy or in the limelight, even though the surfers are the limelight. But as a top level photographer, you kind of, it's a different experience. So yeah, that was hard to break away from. You really realize how selfish you are when you go to transition out of something that you're really good at and you've received a lot of success doing, but then you realize it's hurting the ones you love and you're like, I got to do something different. And that's a gut check. Yeah. I think it took a lot of soul searching and faith and prayer and everything else to be like, okay, Pete Terrace, I'm no longer going to be a staff photographer at Surfing Magazine. That was hard. Yeah. to move on. So, but yeah, you never know where you'll end up, what you'll do with your film set, what you'll do with the skill set. I've been fortunate. It's kind of this crazy full circle of like being interested in the military as a kid, wanting to be a fighter pilot, and then deciding to do biology my senior year in high school, and then getting to work as a marine biologist and getting all this physiology background, and then surf photography, and now working in North American where I use all that physiology information to be able to talk to doctors, and I get to use the photography that I learned in surfing to highlight life-saving folks. And it's this crazy full circle, and I don't know where God has, what the next step will be. It might be something totally different, or it might be continuing. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's fun to figure it out. Scary.
Yeah.
Fun.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Is so Wrightsville is just its home?
Yeah, my wife's family's from here. Her dad's, lives around the corner. So I don't, it's been home. The support network's here. The kids are happy here. It's changed so much since I moved here, but
is your family in California?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
My family's in California, Northern California still, Sonoma, Santa Rosa area, so I see them every once in a while. My mom usually comes out every year. But yeah, it's North Carolina's been home. I mean, Jonah and I have been venturing out west, so I really love the mountains out west. I love chasing elk, even though I haven't put one in the freezer yet, but it's just a wild space that appeals to who I am. But I couldn't uproot the family to chase yet another one of DJ's selfish goals.
Yeah.
So, yeah, North Carolina's been awesome. I love this state. The people have been awesome. South Carolina, I mean, the Southeast to me just kind of welcomed me, and it's just a different pace of life. And coming from, I guess, the closest metro area to me was the Bay Area, San Francisco. I mean, San Francisco's turned into like, what the heck? But back when I was growing up, it was not that way. But still, like, such a different environment. People are so hospitable back here, even with the Yankee invasion. I mean, I invaded too, so yeah. We all have to come from somewhere. But the South, it's a special place. It's, there's things I hate about it. I hate no-see-ums. I hate some things, the summer heat, like August and July, I'm just like, go away. I want to go be in the mountains. But overall, people with values still exist here. Good folks, and they don't always get it right, but nobody ever does.
Well, if you come to Charleston, let us know.
Absolutely.
We'll relive.
You guys drove all the way up here. I was like, what? You guys are, oh.
Yeah, we'll relive those days. Hopefully get some waves.
That'd be fun.
Cam Richards had his premiere, and then we had the best day of waves we've had all year.
Really?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It was like kind of random.
I haven't seen his video yet, but Cam's so
That's
remarkable.
one thing. He's holding tight to some footage. Like you said, he hasn't just like released everything. And so I thought that was pretty admirable.
One of my first custom board that I got was one of his dad's boards, Shape Me. So yeah. Yeah. Lots of ties back. It was crazy because he would have been tiny. He would have been a baby. And now, like, him and Mason Barnes, his birthday is 2 days after Jonah's. I saw him the other day. I was like, how old are you going to be, Mason? He's like 30. I was like, oh my gosh. I helped get him his first sponsor, and now he's like a supermodel to the star, like hanging out with Miley Cyrus, doing supermodel gigs, and then surfing giant waves. Like, they still, like, his wave's going to be the biggest wave ever ridden. They're just not released. Like, they're basically taking one guy and saying, you get the world record, and then they're waiting and saying, you got the world record, and then finally they'll get to Mason's wave and be like, and you got the world record. And in the meantime, somebody else, or he's like, I'm going to get a bigger one. Like,
yeah, it's wild.
That's just you're a different beast. So it's fun to see the kids that you've helped along the way, like, achieve amazing things. Or, Cam's like the real estate mogul now, and still ripping, like, and filming films and traveling all around. He's in the Bahamas right now. He messaged me, I'm in the Bahamas, I'll call you when I get back. I was like, I hate you. Must be nice. Yeah. But it's awesome to see their success, especially like the kids that have their heads screwed on straight. And I think the East Coast has a lot of kids that are that way. Mm-hmm. They're blue collar surfers. They've worked hard to get where they're at. they had to fight against an industry that's based in California that has always kind of viewed the East Coast as like, except for Hurricane Swell when they're back here for randomly on their bus tour and they score and they're like, wow, you can actually get really barreled here.
Yeah.
That was always the perception you were fighting.
You shoot with Brett and they're like, do you want $40? We'll take all your photos.
Thanks. You're like, I'll do it because I love you and I don't even care anymore. Like it was just fun to do it. So
yeah, that was cool though.
Yeah, it was fun to, Brett's like, I don't care, do whatever you want with the photos. Yeah. I was like, okay, Surfline, here you go. And it was fun to reconnect with Matt Pruitt when he wrote it, just because I hadn't talked to him in forever. But yeah, you're not gonna pay your kids' tuition with surf photos these days, unless there's some guys that are still Corey Wilson. But he does a lot of high-end stuff too.
Yeah.
And Ryan Miller, but he's like a slumlord and has a bunch of. He like did really well with Red Bull and hooking up with the big brands. Man, it's few and far between.
How many covers did you get during your career?
I honestly don't know. I got, I don't even know at surfing, more than 5. I got some covers at Surfing Magazine. I think, to me, then I had covers for like Hawaii Skin Diver, which I loved working with them. They handled print beautifully. Like Cliff is a legend. Like the way he built a magazine and told the stories of our adventures spearfishing was really special. And he won a bunch of awards. It's like I got all these awards from like international competitions in Hawaii, like for advertising because of Cliff's work. Like,
oh wow.
So those were always special. And then covers of Stab were always fun, like the international covers. And then now for me, it's like I've had 2 covers of Journal of Special Operations Medicine, which is like pretty meaningful because it's like cover of JSOM. It's a medical journal, which doesn't seem like it's sexy, but for what I do now, that's really cool to be able to, give the guys, to have back in their squadron or in their med bay that, they were part of something like that. So those are the covers I'm shooting for these days. They still exist. But yeah, no, that was the last cover I had. I think it was a JSOM cover. My last surf cover was at Damo at Greenbush.
Okay.
It was either Damo at Greenbush. It wasn't Skeleton Bay. It wasn't Mozambique. Mozambique was before Greenbush. Maybe it was Damo. I can't remember. But that was special to get Damo one because he's just the gem of a human. And like all those years watching his, I had one of CJ and get one of Taj and you're like, Damo, get one of Yaden or get one of Dion. Like I haven't gotten Damo one, so that was really cool to like get him one on a wave that was just scary and he was just charging. So yeah, covers are always fun. That's what I would always tell my surfers. What are we gonna do today? Shoot covers and spreads. Same as every day. Now it's like Pinky in the Brain. What are we gonna do? Take over the world? I took that. I was like, okay, that's what we're gonna do.
Yeah,
that was fun.
Awesome. I think that's everything. Thank you so much.
No, thank you guys for coming up.
Absolutely.